Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Thursday's Ask the SCSA. My name is Justin Brooks, Safety Advisor, and we'll be talking about COR today. So we're going to be talking about the milestone systems and some of the frequently asked questions and kind of common pitfalls when it comes to COR. So before we get into this, because we have a ton of stuff to cover today, we'll just go a few housekeeping things. So there is a Q&A on Facebook. There'll be someone monitoring that, as well as with on Zoom here. So if you do have any questions, just shoot it in the Q&A. We have a ton of stuff to go through, but we're going to try and get to them as soon as possible. And if need be, all our contact information is on our website at scsaonline.ca. So you can go over there, contact an advisor through that, and we can get to your question if for some reason we don't get to it right away. So before we get into the presentation, we're just going to introduce everyone. So we'll start with Joanne, please.
My name is Joanne Davis, and I'm an advisor here at the Regina office, and I work in the southern regions of Moose Jaw and Swift Current.
I'll go next. My name's Kieran. I work out of the Saskatoon office. I deal with a few different regions around Saskatchewan. I deal with Prince Albert, the area around Saskatoon, west of Saskatoon towards Macklin, Unity area, and east of Saskatoon and the Wynyard, Humboldt, and all those little places region.
Hey, thanks. Name's Mike Moore. I'm out of the Saskatoon office as a safety advisor, and I take care of the Battleford, Lloyd, and Meadow Lake areas.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And just so you guys know, this is going to be on our YouTube channel. So these are all recorded, everything. So you can view them on Facebook and YouTube. We have a ton of other videos there available on YouTube. This is going to be a great one to reference because it goes through the whole COR process. So without any further ado, you'll notice I'll be going between screen sharing and the panelists here because we got a lot of questions. So let's start it up as soon as I figure out how to share my screen. All right. We can see that?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the COR Orientation. All right, so let me bounce through here. All right, so our timeline will be broken up for this into 3 separate phases. This is one of the best ways to look at the process, as it allows you to set obtainable goals for each stage. That's a big part of this, is setting those goals. These phases are pre-sign up. So this is the information stage. This is a very important part of the process where we as advisors suggest you meet with us as goals, to set goals. So this will determine who will get the training and what your specific needs are as a company. Your milestone 1, this is where you must have all your training complete, and this includes proficiencies, and your manual has to pass the manual review process. This timeline is maximum 1 year from registration. And the last one is your milestone 2, pre-audit stage. So this is the part where you have been collecting documentation throughout the milestones, and you're now fine-tuning things prior to your baseline audit. This audit must be done within this time frame. So there's no going over that time frame. Timeline is maximum 6 months from passing your milestone 1 date. So between milestone 1 and milestone 2, you have 18 months to complete everything. All right, so we're going to talk about the pre-sign-up milestone, well, not a milestone, but the pre-sign-up stage here. So I'm just going to stop my screen share, and I'm just going to ask our panel some questions just to get some information from them. So first, we're going to come to Mike. So when meeting with an advisor, what are some questions you should have prepared? And what should you bring to your first meeting?
Hey, thanks, Justin. I think the pre-sign-up is an important aspect of the COR process in, getting your head wrapped around what am I looking at? Because like you said, with the milestone process, you're going to have 18 months from the day that you sign up. So you want to kind of, I would say, a pre-plan and an understanding of what this process is actually going to look like is, I like to call it essential. I've worked with companies that their goal is just COR. They're just like, you know what? We're going for COR. It's time. We've done all our, we've got our production up to speed. Or we're good. We know what our jobs look like. We can have pretty predictable outcomes. And now it's time to be professional when it comes to safety. And that a lot of companies go through that phase of like production first and then safety. Now, ultimately, we would start a business and safety would be integrated from the beginning. But a lot of times what happens is that it's coming up after. And so when it comes to that point, there's a lot of companies that just say, I want it, and they hammer through it and get it done. It's just like a flip of a switch, which is ideal. We're just going to go for core. We're going to, whatever that means, whatever that process looks like, we're going to implement a program and we're going to get this going. So when you first meet with an advisor, which is probably your best idea prior to ever signing up, is phone the SCSA, say, hey, how do I get a hold of an advisor that I can talk to? And this doesn't matter province-wide, right? You can get someone on Zoom or you can talk to them through the phone. Some of the questions that they want to bring is, what does this process look like? Can you give me an overview of the process? And then I think a lot of it too is from an advisor standpoint is we also have questions. And some of the questions like that I want to know is, for one, I want to know their motivation. And honestly, I'm not so concerned about the moral side of your motivation. It's, okay, why do you want this? Is it for pre-bid qualification? Is it because you've had an incident and you want to make sure that never happens again? Is it for professionalism? Is it because there's a requirement of this, that, or whatever, right? So where is your motivation coming from? That's a very important aspect. So bring that to the first meeting. And also, do you have a current safety program that you're utilizing, or any pieces of a safety program? I think it's very, very apt to be able to answer those questions right out the gates before signing up, because then it changes the process. It changes what it looks like. So basically, the biggest question would be, what is this going to look like? And then timeline, right? What's the timeline look like? So if you know that you're a seasonal employer and you're looking at an 18-month process, maybe you can hammer it out in 12 months, right? Get through both milestones and get it done. But we want to look at the end goal and look at, from the very beginning, when do we want to do an audit? Because if we need 6 months of solid documentation to conduct an audit, and you're signing up in a time that will put you in a rotation of that 12 or 18-month period where you're not even going to have any active sites come audit time or when the deadline's up, you got to look at that and really hash that out to plan your sign up, right? Because it is an important date to recognize this. What is my actual sign up date? Because that will, in the end, that does push to where your audit's going to be. And if it's going to be on an off season, you're going for core and we're going to be coming out and you don't have any active job sites, it's not going to work. So we're going to want to line the site up for when you have active job, or the audit up for when you have active job sites. So
For sure. So basically, kind of in summary, make sure you've prepared what your motivations are, what you think your timeline should be or has to be as far as a company, and bring any current safety manual, any forms, any program that you're using to that meeting.
For sure.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Mike. Kieran, what can a company interested in COR start on today before they meet with an advisor?
Just like some of the things Mike said there, you can start with some documentation. If you have documentation, like hazard assessments, it's good stuff to have anytime, just because that's what OH&S regulates, that hazards need to be identified and controlled. Through COR, it might be a different process, but it's a good way to start. For the COR process, a good place to start is some of our training. If you can knock out some of the training beforehand, you'll end up with more time during that first milestone to actually do and work on COR. Because there's lots of people that have went through the process might know that training does take up a lot of time. They are only offered at certain times of the month. And as well, you might not be able to attend certain classes just because we live in a real world where things happen. So a good place to start is on some training, and you can get a hold of the advisors to find out which classes to register for right away. And then you'll be good.
Perfect. Yeah. And again, like all that stuff's available on our website. You can find those hazard assessments on our website. You could download the PDF, Word format. I can't remember if it's PDF or Word, but you can download that, print them off, start assessing hazards to start, understanding more of the process. And then, of course, everything else can be found on our website as far as training is concerned with our schedules and stuff. And, if you go to the COR link, you can run through what courses you need. And like Kieran said, Right now, all of our training is available online. So, I mean, you don't need to come to a class to get that training to get started. So absolutely perfect. Thank you, Karen. All right, Joanne, how do you determine who in the company should get the training?
Really good question. And I discuss this with companies a lot. First of all, it does need to be one of your full-time employees that resides in Saskatchewan. So that you do have to take in consideration. It's going to be somebody who's going to have time to dedicate to the program. It does take time to get started. And obviously somebody who's going to be familiar with the company processes. It's going to be somebody who's going to lead by example and take safety seriously and be able to guide the rest of the team, whether it be working with management and supervisors, and it can be either one of those. It can be somebody in the office as well. It can be a variety of people, but it's got to be somebody who's going to have time, familiar with the processes, and be passionate about safety as well. You can also divide this up between 2 people, and they can work as a team. So it doesn't have to be one person. Depending on your company, you can have a couple people involved.
Absolutely, yeah. That whole, you know, the idea that safety starts at the top, and the people that are most involved in the process are great people to have at the helm of the safety wheel. And I've often told people, you know, it's great to have 2 people that are heavily involved in the process get the auditor training, because an audit can be a big part of the process, and the more people you have trained on that understand that process, it really helps out moving things a lot smoother.
So
Awesome. Thank you.
I'd like to add to that too, Justin. One of the pitfalls that, since we're going to talk about some pitfalls, is we sometimes can see a company that sends an employee to get the training, but someone else in the company is in charge of getting them COR. So the training, one of the most important things to realize about the training is the training sets you up to be able to achieve COR. Right? Like, so safety management, what do I need in a safety program? Safety auditor, how do I audit that program? If the person in the business that's heading up the whole COR process doesn't take those training courses, it is going to be painful. So I think that someone that has the capacity to manage and implement the program and to have those frank discussions with management about the new things that we're implementing to achieve this, those are the people that need to get the training for sure as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, and that's very important, because a lot of times those people that are in those positions, those are the ones that are making decisions. And Mike, while we're kind of on that topic a little bit, when it comes to decision makers, what are some of the associated costs of achieving COR, and what are the benefits?
Yeah, this is a big question for companies, is like, how much is this going to cost me, right? And so the funny thing is that that's not a canned answer, right? If you have 2 people in your company and you're going for COR, your costs are going to be different than if you're a 50-person operation running out of 2 different cities, stuff like this. So it's very specific to the company. And that's, again, why this is a good question in the pre-sign up for COR. What is this going to cost? How am I going to look at this? So training is one aspect. It's going to cost you money. Good thing for the industry that we're in, for anyone in the B rate code, your training for a 1-day class is $50 plus tax, or $100 for a 2-day class plus tax. Anyone outside that works maybe in line with construction, like an engineering firm or architect or supplier or something like that, they're going to be a non-member because of their rate code through WCB, because our funding comes through WCB, through employers actually putting money into the WCB. And then less than 1% of that money comes to the association to help keep our lights on. So those are really our members by default, because they're paying to keep our lights on anyway. So, but anyone that works in line with construction, like I say, the architects and stuff like that, $300 for a 1-day course or $500 for a 2-day course, pretty standard for par for the course when it comes to training costs out there anyway. They just don't get that benefit of being a member and getting the breaks. So your math has to be contingent on that. You can go to our website and look up the COR classes that are required. There's 4 COR classes that are going to be your baseline classes. But then afterwards, like, you still got to look at, when we're talking about professionalism and safety, if you got people working at heights, there's fall pro involved. If you got people in confined space, there's confined spaces involved. Training, if you got, if there's a ground disturbance, or if there's, so power mobile equipment, all kinds of training that's associated, because really the legislation points out very clearly that people need to be trained in their duties. So really when it comes down to COR, that answer is very, it's a fluid answer. It's kind of, it's a moving target depending on your company on how much the cost will be. Now you have the people's wage while they're in training that you're paying them for. And when it comes to audit time, then you're going to have, if you're a non-member, you're going to have a $425, I believe, a day audit fee. And as a member, or doing the audit is actually free. So company specific is the point. Talk to an advisor. Maybe there's some math you can do to kind of look at that. And then there's the time, the cost involved with whoever's going to, the people involved in the program, whether it's development or implementation on site, or even the people in the end that instead of just getting at her in the morning, they're doing a hazard assessment first in the morning for 10 minutes. Now that 10 minutes for 3 people is a little bit of money. So you want to look at all those costs. Now to the benefits, let's look at the costs of not having things in place as well as having them in place, the benefits. Incident prevention is a huge hidden cost that we can't really qualify unless there's an incident. So if there's an incident, obviously there's some big costs. Your site could be completely shut down for however long that it takes to do a proper investigation. And even if it's bad enough, you could have OH&S in there doing an investigation, and there could be contraventions in place, and there could actually be, if it's bad enough, there could be criminal charges if there's a criminal negligence involved. So if you're gonna get away with not documenting anything and not doing anything, and that we figure that that's a risk that we're willing to take long term, you can talk to a myriad of companies that's proven wrong for, and then because they don't have paperwork involved and they didn't prove that people were assessing hazards and stuff, that cost is just, it adds up. There's some companies in this province that it's hundreds of thousands of dollars for some incidents. And what if I was working for a client and I'm on a site and they have a safety as a #1 important thing, and I have a bad safety record and I actually lose that contract? It could be millions of dollars. Some companies say a worker death costs them $10 million to take care of that. So all this proactive things to make sure we don't have incidents and injuries in our workplace, those are cost savings in the long run, sustainable business, right? What about reputation? If I can avoid incidents from happening, reputation is going to be maintained through the community and through industry and stuff like that. That can be a big influence on money-making ability and stuff like that. Pre-bid qualifications is another positive thing. So there's a lot of contracts out there that either it's a hard mandate to have COR or CCOR in place or be going through the process, or there's a point system involved where you actually can gain points in getting the contract. And there is examples out there of where the hard dollar amount that was given on a project was actually higher than some of the other ones that had lower dollar, but because of safety, they were able to, through the point system, still get the contract, even though they were a higher cost. So there's a lot of purchasers of construction out there that really have recognized that by mitigating risk, they're gonna have consistent outcomes and stuff like that. Plus, honestly, with COR and CCOR, it's consistent language throughout industry. A lot of companies, when they want to get a safety in place, they go through the COR process or the CCOR process, and the fundamentals get put in place and that common language. So when I go work for a general contractor and I'm a subcontractor or something like that, and they say, hey, you need to do toolboxes at this frequency and hazard assessments at this frequency, and here's our paperwork and we want you to use it. We've already been trained, right? My company has already done the internal work of training our workers in the language that my general contractor is using. And that's a big relationship piece, right? Because there's none of this whole having to retrain through their orientation and stuff on how to actually fill out this paperwork. So also due diligence, which I talked about already. If OH&S was to do an investigation and they ask for proof that you're assessing hazards, proof that you're communicating to workers, proof that you're doing incident investigations, that you have progressive disciplinary procedures in place, and all this stuff, that you're actually doing your job the way that the law mandates you have to, this COR actually puts a very good foundation for due diligence in place. So, yeah, I think I've answered that question.
And just in that first part, when we're talking about the costs associated in training, I was thinking maybe that's a good, when you go for that meeting with the advisor, that first meeting, and you want to really start determining costs in that pre-sign-up stage, maybe it's not a bad idea to bring a list of employees, so you can start highlighting and determining who needs fall protection, who's getting the auditor, who's getting this and that. We can work through a cost analysis and get you a really good idea on what the preliminary stages of this will end up costing you as a company. And then you could determine the length of time you spend in that pre-sign-up stage before you even mark your name down. That way you can guarantee you get all that training done. So, perfect. All right, so I'm just gonna share that screen again. All right, so we've discussed what to do before you sign up. So now you're at the point you signed up and you have your sights set on your first set of goals before milestone 1 is over. This is where the majority of the documentation will be collected. So now we'll go to our panels to find some more information on this topic, milestone 1. All right, so Joanne, what is the best way to start implementing documentation?
So the best way to start implementing your documentation, obviously, you want to take a look at your safety program. So we're saying your milestone number 1, you're developing your safety program. You want to look at your safety program and you want to break it up and make it manageable. Doing everything all at once can be overwhelming. So start with one document and bring in another one and get everybody trained and bring them in. If you don't have any, if you already have some, continue doing those and introduce new ones. And I think a little later on, we'll talk about exactly which documents would be good to start with. But I think it's really important to look at your program. What do you have? See what you need, and then pick one and just start with that. All at once may be a little too much.
For sure, yeah. And we see a lot of companies, they kind of feel like they're a little bit swamped because the reality behind COR is there's really not that, obviously it's all dependent on size of company, but there's really not, when you stand back, that much documentation. But when it's 7 different things all at once, it can feel a little bit, they can feel like they're drowning. And it's like Kieran had said, a hazard assessment is a great place to start training your workers. And then you can start working into those toolbox talks and safety meetings and making sure things are inspected. And it slowly starts kind of almost piecing itself together, doesn't it? Perfect. All right, Mike, what's the best way to train your workers in the use of documentation?
Joanne alluded to this a bit with the implementation and stuff like that piece-wise. I would say the best way to do it is typically it's through an orientation is going to be the starting point. So a lot of companies that are going to be implementing COR and stuff like that, you could have workers that worked for your company for 30 years and now you're implementing a safety program, or you've done revisions to your safety program and you're going to have a new way of doing things, or just a slight switch. You can do that through a benchmark orientation where you benchmark all your employees to make sure they had a proper orientation to your new way of doing things. But then moving forward from there, let your supervisors do it. Honestly, if you got one site, or you have, like, if you're a company that has a crew of 6 people and you're meeting every Monday morning or every day in the shop, do it there. If you're broken up into 6 different crews on your sites, do it there. So I would say, by whoever's in charge of the safety program, make sure your supervisors are well trained for starters, right? So, and it's not just through taking some of the training through our work through the SCSA. It'll also be through understanding your own program and then really training those supervisors and really training the workers in actually the paperwork. There's so much paperwork, for example, hazard assessments that come in and it says slip, trips, falls, and it says watch my feet as a corrective action. Sure, there could be slips, trips, and falls. Where are they? What are they? And the corrective measures a lot of times is not like watch your feet. It's like being on a roof and saying, working at 30 feet up in the air, what am I going to do? make sure I don't step off the roof. Like, that's not a proper corrective action. So what you want to do is look at your paperwork and really train your workers from a supervisory level, from a site level, so that when employees have paperwork coming in and it's missing things, that's being reviewed by the supervisor, and they're really coaching employees and really working with them to understand on a one-on-one basis as it moves forward. Hey, you can also utilize the SCSA, and I know that I've gone out numerous times to companies and done a hazard assessment PowerPoint or presentation where we'll go through it because they're having challenges with some of this paperwork with the hazard assessment, and the understanding from a whole corporate level, from top to bottom. We really have a hard time understanding what's a hazard, what's a control measure, and that kind of stuff. So go in and really train them, and we use a PowerPoint, put up pictures from their own sites, stuff like that, and really discuss that stuff so that the quality of the paperwork and the understanding of the paperwork can go up. There's nothing worse than filling out a piece of paper and not understanding what the heck you're doing. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. And sorry about that, everybody. I got kind of booted out for a moment, something with my internet connection. So hopefully it didn't mess anything up. Joanne, there was a question here. I think we'll skip it because it looks like it's been answered, which was companies wonder when they start implementing documentation, do they do it at once or start slow? But in that first question, you answered that perfectly. So we'll just move on to Kieran. What can advisors do for companies during the Milestone 1 stage?
Well, it's been kind of alluded to as well, but there's definitely more things we can do. So like Mike said, we can go do presentations on certain topics you might be having trouble with. So if you're having trouble with hazard assessments, understanding the difference between hazard assessment, site inspections, yard inspections, we can kind of clarify that as well. And then the next step is actually going on to construction sites with your workers and going and assessing the hazards with them as well there. So you can do that on site level, as well as we can offer toolbox talks on site with workers on different topics. And during this Milestone 1, we're also very capable of helping on the actual development side. So we have a manual development system, and we've implemented it. I'm not sure, but we've been running it for a few years, and it's very well done. Justin and I actually had the opportunity to make it better this year. So now it fits better with what companies need, and we can really customize it to what a company actually does. So we do manual build sessions and develop manuals that way. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And right now with COVID, I mean, we're all working from home, as everybody can see by our backgrounds. So we are starting to get more virtual with things, and so that we're not really missing or skipping a beat when it comes to helping everyone out achieve COR. So we're still doing manual builds. We're assessing hazards on site via mobile phones, having these phone conversations, everything that we can do to ensure that you can still move forward in the process even during these times.
One thing I missed, Justin, I didn't speak on demonstrations. So we have a number of different demonstrations that, like Justin said, during normal times we provide to companies free of charge. We do have a couple demonstrations that we videotaped and edited for the purpose of showing to companies during the time. So if you have questions about that or maybe want that, we also can provide.
Yeah, absolutely. It's everything short of our fall protection demo we're offering in an online base. So absolutely. Mike, we're going to bring it back to you. So when it comes to organizing documentation, a lot of companies, this is even in the pre-sign-up stage, the whole big question, paper versus paperless. What route should a company take?
This is a personal preference answer. Now, ideally, the world would be at your fingertips via paperless. Okay, like I would say that would be an ideal, especially with remote auditing. So with the whole situation that's going on right now, with us not being able to get on site and into people's offices, some people have home offices, so we're in their homes and stuff like that. We didn't want to be out there and posing any risk to anyone or during our audit, the audit stage. So we really there's an upload that needs to be done of all of the documentation pertinent to the audit, and that's done through an auditor what actually is needed based on where you are in the process and stuff. But so for now, paperless, it would be very advantageous. But a lot of companies don't have the infrastructure in place, or they don't feel like, you know, iPads would work or the cell phones would work on site because they get broken or whatever. So then you're going the paper route. Either route is fine, as long as when we do electronic, we have a way of doing electronic signatures, that kind of stuff, to prove that, like, hey, I'm the one that signed off on that hazard assessment as well, and that kind of stuff. So there's some, but there's a lot of programs out there, like just I've heard of people using Google Docs, I've heard Microsoft Forms. There's a bunch of different avenues out there that doesn't cost a company a fortune to go paperless, at least with some aspects of it, which will then therefore file it immediately, right? They fill it out online and it gets filed immediately when they save it. So I would say paperless would be the best. I just don't know if even in 2020, if those strategies are really that easy if we're not tech savvy. For a lot of companies that have an employee that's tech savvy, this is a piece of cake if they're willing to buy iPads, stuff like that. So, but paper works just fine for the whole process.
Absolutely. And even now more than ever, we're starting to realize that there are some major benefits towards going paperless. But you're right, it's just a cost thing. And this comes down to your own preference. And like you said, your ability to not only access, but to be able to manipulate the system, to be able to do the work in a paperless format. So absolutely, this comes down to that preference thing. And it's great to reach out to other companies that have gone that route maybe and ask them how they like it. One of the benefits of coming to the RSC meetings when we're back holding these, or even in a virtual format, is the ability to kind of meet with other safety professionals and ask those questions. Hey, who's used Microsoft Forms? How did you like it? What were the things you didn't like, the pros and cons, right? So it gives you an opportunity to speak with those people that have done it already. So Kieran, you had kind of talked about the manual development system and building a manual. How can advisors help with the construction of the manual?
So, like I said, we have a development system. So what we actually do is build you a manual according to the COR Audit tool. And we kind of almost work backwards off the audit to develop something that's going to work for your company. So the idea being that if you have a copy and paste manual from other places that you don't spend the time building, then you won't have a manual that's going to work. So the manual we develop, we're going to implement new frequencies. We're going to source out ways that work. We're going to talk about strategies that have worked for other companies of your size and develop the correct program from there. So other things we can do during that process is we have a range of forms. And during that process, we can give you different forms. And then even after the manual is built, if the form's not working, if something's not working, we can reassess. So that's all part of the development system. It's not just a 1-day, 4-hour manual build. There is training, and we do really encourage people to take ownership of it. So we encourage the ownership by training people right off the bat on the manual and how it works. So the prerequisites to that, to actually having this manual development, we ask that you have safety management and safety auditor, so you can bring that level of knowledge to be able to be trained even further.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big thing I stress to companies is this manual build is a partnership, right, between the company and the advisor. We're not just gonna throw something together for you, because that's no different than, you know, having someone else do it for you and you not knowing your manual. So that partnership is key to success further into the program. Like, hey, great, you got a manual, that's awesome, but do you understand it? And just reading it front to back doesn't always, doesn't always cut it, right? So you have to work together to do that. Awesome, thank you. Realized I was muted there for a second. Joanne, what if a company has a manual, while we're talking about those that they've created? How can we as advisors help them?
This is something we can definitely help with. We would ask right now, since we're all working from home, that you email a copy of that manual to us with all the forms that you use. Otherwise, when we're working back out on sites, we would actually come take a look at your manual, sit down with you, and go over it and do a manual review. We do have a checklist of things that we're looking for to create them, to make sure it has a good foundation for what we need for the core COR process. And we can help with the improvements. Let's just say a form is missing some criteria, we can give you one of ours and you can, you know, pick and choose and kind of meld them together to make it your own. If a policy is completely missing, you have a section missing, we can actually help you build that policy. We do have templates for a lot of them, and assist you in that and fill the gaps. And sometimes I've seen a couple manuals that have been sent to me, and it's easier to sometimes build a manual from scratch. I've done that too. Sometimes a manual is just going to be more work to do it with the current manual, and sometimes we start over, and sometimes we just make a few changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, you know, there's been some times where people have just not wanted to have that second look by an advisor, and they're missing some real key components that you find out later during the next milestone, which we'll talk more about here in a second. So yeah, that whole part. And again, this is something that can kind of, hey, I'm thinking about signing up for COR. We already have a program, you know, we can help. We can still, you know, especially with our members, we can still take a look at that program. We can still take a look at that manual. You know, we're going to want you to, if you've already got safety going, hey, you're halfway there. You're already, like Mike had said, you're already speaking the language. So we want to get you there as soon as possible, and that, you know, that works for your company. So shoot us an email, you know, let us look at that manual and take a peek, because there's ways that, like you said, Joanne, we can really improve the system that you're on. Perfect. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen again. I've got so many tabs open right now, it's scary. So screen 2 here. All right. Okay. So now we have more information on reaching that first milestone. And now hopefully you're on to that second milestone. You know, your manual has gone through the review system. You've taken all the courses. This is the point where companies are often collecting their last few months of documentation and waiting for their baseline audit. So keep in mind that that gap between milestone 1 and milestone 2 is 6 months. So this is a great time to speak with your advisor to book a pre-audit. A pre-audit is where an advisor can work with you to help identify some areas of improvement prior to your external audit. So what I'd like to do is go to our panelists and talk a bit about some of those common problem areas we often identify, as well as some tips to help ensure you're better prepared right out of the gate for this milestone. So we'll start with hazard assessments. So Kieran, when it comes to hazard assessments and timing, when should they get done, and what do you have to say about frequency?
So the COR process states there's 2 hazard assessments that must be done for this process. One of them being a pre-job hazard assessment, and then from there, milestone assessments whenever the scope of the job changes. So a decent frequency for a smaller company would be if you're on site for 5 consecutive business days, that you would do a milestone assessment after that pre-job. Not necessarily will you be on a job that lasts a week every time. Lots of small companies deal with daily tasks, or service companies that deal with different things like that. So potentially they'll be doing milestone assessments for things that don't necessarily have a scope change because the job's over already. And then the second part of it is task hazard assessments. So whereas the pre-job looks at the entire scope of the job from setup to completion, a task hazard assessment on a smaller, or maybe a bigger site or a smaller site, will tell you what's being done that day. So what that's getting you to do is to stop and think about the work that's going to happen. So at the start of a day, we look at the job site and we'd assess the hazards there. And honestly, those are best to be done daily, because what better way to actually sit and understand the risks and get the guys to stop and think about it. So if you do them daily, you will have a better understanding of what's going on. And if someone is reviewing those hazard assessments, then they can also have that idea of what did they do today? How did they assess the controls? Maybe if I take a look back, I can see in my head, paint a picture of what was done. So if potentially there was something hazardous that they were working on that we didn't know about, we can intervene later if we don't think the control, and we can have the ability to train further on something. So they are a tool that can be used not just for documentation to have in a closet or filing cabinet, but something that we can use as a predictive document or a lagging indicator in the future. So it's best to have daily hazard assessments in the construction industry, potentially in a manufacturing setting where the risks are the exact same, but slightly different week to week maybe. Then you could have weekly hazard assessments, or in mechanic shop where you're going to be doing the same task. So it really depends on the type of task you're doing and how often the work or task changes.
Absolutely. And you know, and that the big part of that is just being able to step back and really look at your process. When it comes to that, you know, frequencies and timings and things, Joanne, how should a company set a frequency? Is there any type of rule of thumb when it comes to that?
Like Kieran said, that's really going to depend on the company's needs. So like you said, for hazard assessments, we often suggest daily, and again, sometimes weekly, exactly like you said. So a hazard assessment, that's usually what we see, and they're going to be updated as if a new hazard or situation changes, no matter what. We also have a lot of service companies that are members, and you find that they won't necessarily have a new hazard assessment for each house that they go to during the day, but they'll have one where they're able to add the addresses and specific hazards to that site. So there's different ways depending on your company. Again, that's very company specific for all of those. As well, toolbox meetings is often in construction industry, we see them a lot of times weekly, sometimes monthly, depending on the size of the company. When it comes to site inspections, again, you're going to see them weekly. Some people have done it industrially, do them daily sometimes. And then your office inspections sometimes be monthly or quarterly, right? So this is, again, going to depend on the needs of your company. If you find that you have a frequency, let's say that you're doing weekly hazard assessments, but you're having a lot of near misses and other incidences occur, it's going to be a cue that maybe we need to up our frequency. Maybe we're not doing things enough. So it's fluid. The safety management system is fluid, where you can change and update things as your company changes and as your needs changes. So those are some of the timelines we like to give for frequencies, but again, company specific.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that fluidity of a safety management system is important for people to realize. They always feel like they're locked in. Well, I already set the frequency. You know, the big thing when it comes to those hazard assessments is I always tell companies, start daily, add to things as they change, and make sure that you're getting those done before the work begins. On the topic of hazard assessments and the completion of them, Mike, which items are most commonly missed on hazard assessments that you found in your experience?
I guess it would vary. I would say it's not necessarily common, but it can happen that hazard assessments are filled out in the job trailer before they head out to the job site. That is very apparent. It comes to crystal clear the minute you walk on the job site, and some of the hazards are that slips, trips, and falls and stuff like that. Nothing specific, just basically some generic hazards, generic things. So I think a lot of times it comes down to kind of quality that gets missed, and not to mention that, like, just leaving blanks on your form. If a supervisor needs to sign off that they reviewed your hazard assessment, like, we got to get that done. If there's signatures needed, that needs to be done. If there's check-ins or whatever, if the hazard assessment, the whole point of the form is to walk you through a process. So we need to walk through that process, and we need to do it at the job face prior to conducting work. So we're there, we see, we plan, right? Not identifying actual hazards on the job site it can be common, and the supervisor should be checking the hazard assessments for quality in that, and then improper corrective actions. The last thing you'd want to see as a company owner or supervisor, see hazard assessments come in for one, not addressing hazards, but another one is you have answers, or you have these hazards on there, but then the corrective action is not actual corrective action. It's just basically like, watch your step. So that's common.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that all the time, right? The whole slips and trips thing, right? Not what's, what is the hazard, not that's the outcome, right? So yeah, 100%. That's a big one. Joanne, on, when it comes to subcontractors and including them, how have companies you've worked with had success in including subcontractors when it comes to hazard assessments?
When it comes to hazard assessments, or in their whole safety program as well, is their orientation, they're going to go through it. So they're going to have an orientation for the subcontractors, include them in the hazard assessment process and have them sign off. Even if they have their own form, have them come over and review theirs as well. And if you're going to be working side by side, having that informal, constant communication with them is important because they are not separate. They are part of your construction site, and to treat them as such, that they're part of the team, and that communication and making sure they have that proper orientation and training and communication with them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that, you said it right there, that teamwork, right? I think it was the SCSA that had a poster in an old trailer that I used to work in that said, with a team of two, the more you can do safely. Stuck with me for like 15 years, right? So that teamwork is imperative when it comes to safety. Mike, this is a big thing when it comes to hazard assessments. What is a critical task, and how have companies you've worked with narrowed down what their critical tasks are?
So critical tasks are in the hazard assessment section of the audit tool, and then they also apply in the procedure section of the audit tool, looking for a procedure for all critical tasks. I want to define critical tasks first. So a task or job that requires you to go over and beyond your normal job task, a particular task or job that has a high risk of serious injury, high probability of injury, or a job or task that you would not perform on a regular basis. A lot of hazard assessments will actually have a section on them or a little blank saying, any critical tasks. Now, what that's to do is to prompt an employee to say, we already have procedures for some of these critical tasks, so I want to go through that procedure with, like, I'm going to work in confined space, for example. Well, that could be a critical task for companies. So they would want to review the procedure that's built for confined space. Now, if I'm on a job and I'm like, okay, well, I got to get up on a ladder and there's like a 30-foot fall over a hand railing that I'm working on just to switch a light out or something like that, all of a sudden this becomes a critical task during my day, therefore prompting you to now create a procedure on site. And then that procedure could, if you wanted to, get added to your manual as a critical task procedure. What you want to do for identifying critical tasks is look at that definition, start there for building procedures. Look at the critical tasks your company performs and start by building those procedures right out the gate.
That's awesome. Perfect answer, Mike. While we got you on the mic, let's go over to training. And Mike, sorry, you know what? Actually, sorry, I gotta mix up here. Joanne, sorry, Mike, you're cut for now.
Oh, no.
Joanne, what can you train your staff in, and what should you leave to a third party?
This is a very good question. You should definitely train your own people in your own safety program, in your practices, procedures, site-specific WMIS. And as for other training, let's talk about like Fall Pro, for example. You want somebody that's qualified and competent. So maybe they took that train the trainer course, or they have other qualifications, they can do that. If not, if you're not qualified and competent to do that training, you want to find a reputable third party. And that's the short answer for that one. If you know it, not qualified and competent, you're going to find a third party to do it.
For sure. Absolutely. All right, Mike, now you're up. So when it comes to training your own staff, how do you bridge that gap between training that you've got at the SCSA and working with an advisor and getting that information to your workers?
So any of the training that you typically get at the SCSA, if it's like Full Pro, confined space, or whatever, those are applied knowledge training courses, which you would want any employee that works at heights to take fall protection training or confined space training if they're in confined spaces. You don't transfer that knowledge on. what you typically do through the SCSA courses, if there's a management structure course that you're taking, like safety management or auditor or anything like that, that you're going to be managing your program in, how you'll bring that to workers is not necessarily, you can do that through conversations if they're wondering why we're doing this, that kind of stuff. But typically it's going to be found in the the development and implementation of your safety program. So you're going to have a program that you're going to use this knowledge of the higher level things, and you're going to apply that knowledge to setting frequencies. So what are we going to do? When are we going to do it? Setting up the paperwork and stuff like that. And then you're going to train your employees on your safety program. And that's the what they need to know, right? We need to know what do you need to know? This is what you need to know. You don't necessarily need to know all of this other high level stuff that you're learning.
Absolutely. So that safety manual acts as that main bridge of information between that management system and the workers. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Kieran, how have you seen companies implement training into their business?
Well, there's a few different ways you can implement training. One really good way is to leave it to a third party and have that implemented that way, and then have those people utilize the training. So for the internal parts, like Joanne said, one company that I work with has implemented training for all their equipment. So they have a fabrication shop, and in that fabrication shop, they have a guy who is competent and qualified, and you cannot use pieces of equipment unless you have received training. And they have it all the way down to grinders. And it doesn't have to be super heavy into the details of the equipment. It's simply showing someone how to use it, and then allowing them at least 50% of the time of that training of them demonstrating to you that they can use it. And once you feel comfortable, you can let them actually use it when they're unsupervised. So in that way, you're developing qualified and competent people. And like I said, Mike said earlier, due diligence. So you're doing anything and everything under the law to protect your workers against the things that you're going to make them do.
For sure. No, that's perfect. We are gonna go a few minutes over our normal 1 hour, just a couple of minutes, because we have a few questions left to get through. I'd like to speak on inspections and emergency preparedness and things like that. So let's keep moving, and we'll try and get you the perfect answer in the least amount of time. We'll see what we can do here. So when it comes to inspections, Mike, frequency, is there any type of golden rule when it comes to setting frequency for inspections?
You're muted, pal.
Still muted.
I was saying that I was going to take 15 minutes to answer the question. So
There you go.
I'm just going to answer it twice. So the frequency, there's no golden rule. It's going to be company specific. If you got 3 people working for your company, or if you have 50 people, frequency for different things is going to, if you have different crews, or you have one crew, if you have an office, if you have a storage facility. So different inspections, different pieces. If I use power mobile equipment, you need to inspect as per the power mobile equipment. If you have PPE, specialized PPE, stuff like that, manufacturer's recommendations. Tools, ladders, stuff like that, manufacturer's recommendations. If I buy a ladder from Louisville, go to Louisville website, phone them up, say, what do you guys require for inspections? Do you have a formal inspection you want us to do, like on a form? And then see if you can get a copy of that. The OHC is going to be doing inspections. And then usually, typically minimum before every meeting. Work sites, offices, shops, and storage facilities, we don't leave those out of the inspection process, but they get done at a reasonable frequency. Again, back to the people that have the capacity are the people that come out with the strategy for the program. So you can't have someone that doesn't have capacity to actually implement and to sway what people are going to be doing, setting frequency, so people on site say, that doesn't work for us, we're not going to do it. Well, your manual says you were going to do it. So that's a quick answer. It's all specific.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Joanne, what are some commonly missed items on an inspection form?
So with this question, I'm going to look specifically with your site inspections. A lot of time, and this applies to others as well, the date and time that the controls have actually taken place and who actually put the controls in place. That column is there, but a lot of times people maybe initial, but they don't put the date and time. And also to include your worker. So your worker did come on the inspection, but they didn't sign off. So a lot of times we're missing the worker that participated. And the last part of that is actually posting the form for everybody to see or communicating that inspection.
Yeah, that's perfect. So I guess, Mike, you answered the next question already in your first about where to conduct. So making sure you hit those office shops and work sites and who's doing them. Joanne, what's the best way to ensure that everything gets inspected?
So to make sure everything is inspected, you want to make sure in your health and safety program, you've actually listed all your sites, your shop, you do have a yard, your office, include your office, so include that, and then have a developed or even download, ask us for one, we do have them as well, a checklist, and you can make it specific to your site, specific to your office, and just give you some clues of what you want to check out. Even make a different one for your shop.
Perfect. So emergency preparedness, this is a pretty common one that we find there's some issues with. Mike, what are some of the best ways you've seen companies prepare for the worst?
So I guess you got to look at where you live. We're not going to have emergency preparedness for hurricanes in Saskatchewan. So what you want to do is look at where you work. What do you do? If you work alone, is there emergency working alone? Is there emergency with wildlife, like in the north or in remote communities? I know of a company that had a flood. So now that we've had a flood, we're probably going to be looking at what's our emergency preparedness for the flood again in the future, if it ever happened again. So it could be from incidents. It could be just from looking at your operations and saying what could happen and then putting something in place to deal with that.
Just taking that step back, right? And I've worked with certain companies that talk very specifically on drills and skills. You have a drill. How do you build skills? It's by practicing those skills, right? Once something's happened. So yeah, absolutely. Joanne, how do you determine your entire scope of work to see what emergencies you'll most likely have to prepare for? And how do you determine ones that you have not thought about?
So Mike kind of touched on this a little bit. You need to think about your environment and your processes. So your environment, fire, weather, those are pretty standard. You're going to need to have those. What about remote work? What about wildlife? Are you near water? Other processes, electrical, confined space, trenching, explosive, releases of gases, angry customers, or so forth. What about motor vehicle accidents? So you really need to step outside the box and take a look at your processes and what your workers do every day and what are those potentials. A lot of people forget about the motor vehicle accident, yet a lot of them drive. So that would be my suggestion for that. Look at environment and processes.
Perfect. And while you're still on, Joanne, we'll move to records and stats. We've got a few minutes left and a few questions left, so we're doing good. With records and statistics, what's the best way you found companies manage their records and stats?
The best way is to, number one, have the appropriate templates and forms, spreadsheets to begin with. Make sure for first aid, don't forget you have your log, but don't forget about having your log in your kits and looking at that maybe during your inspection. Put that on your list. In your reporting procedures, make sure that's reported. Add those to the spreadsheet. You want to take a look at all your documentation monthly. Take a look at the difference between your safety summary, so what you're doing for your safety documentation, and document all that, your orientations, compared to your new hires, and make sure everything is actually documented. And then take a look at your incidences. Those are going to be different as well. And understand that stats are going to be limited for baseline because you're just getting started, but they're going to be a lot more inclusive when it comes to your externals and annuals. So you do want to make sure that you keep up to it. Do not wait to the last minute. Don't do it once a year. That's not its purpose. Take a look at it every single month and take a look at those trends going on in your company.
Yeah, absolutely. It's far too often we either find people that include absolutely everything or not enough. There's very little times that it's really like in that middle ground. So this is a really key area to talk to your advisors and really pay a lot of time on this aspect because, like you said, Joanne, in that baseline audit, it doesn't come in as key because you don't have as much, with those external audits, by the time you get to them, sometimes companies forget that they had to record all this stuff. So now we're going to go into a little bit of a speed round here. We got 4 questions left, 60 seconds or less. Mike, what if I miss a milestone?
Cash me outside. Yeah, that's a private joke. Private joke. Moving on. So if you miss a milestone, there's a 6-month waiting period. First of all, again, back to that pre-job meeting. Let's plan. Let's not move. Let's not miss a milestone. Let's have the right people in place before we ever register. So let's set ourselves up for success by the pre-meeting with an advisor to try to get to the bottom of, is this something that's going to work? If you miss a milestone, 6-month waiting period from when your milestone date ended. Or so, like, let's say I missed milestone 1 year after I registered. You're going to miss that milestone. We're going to take you out of the program, and then you can re-enroll in the program 6 months later. Now, this is common that I'll work with a company that they miss a milestone because of whatever, COVID, and then we'll set them up to reapply 6 months later. So if you missed it in June, reapply January, and then fast track the program. So you'll be already collecting documentation, you'll be running your program, and you're going to get from registration to certification in a very fast manner. Maybe 3 months, something like that it would take you to get certified. So keep working towards it, and it'll become a reality.
So in other words, if you're in the 6-month waiting period, revert back to the pre-sign-up part of this video, and you can kind of follow that, and that becomes your new pre-sign-up stage. It just has a clock on it, that's all. Thanks, Mike. Joanne, missing forms. What documentation is generally forgot about?
Okay, this list, I guess, is not so short, but near miss reports. I do have respiratory inspections when it comes to PPE. We see Fall Pro basic, but where's respiratory inspections? Even basic PPE sometimes is missing. They just do a check box on one of their toolbox meetings, but there's no actual formal process. Office and yard inspections often get missed. Disciplinary action reports. Sometimes it happened, but nobody actually put it in documentation. You have incomplete records and stats. Preventative maintenance, that's a big section. Again, talk to your advisor to make sure that your preventative maintenance is looking good. And vehicle inspections can be often forgotten as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Joanne. We're actually going to end it there. We're going over our time limit here that we generally like to keep. So again, thank you very much to our panelists. This is very difficult to put together and to make it happen in an hour because there's so much information, which really drives home the point that companies that work with their advisors are generally speaking the most successful within these programs, because as you can see, we can barely fit in 1 hour short versions of everything that there is to know. So again, work with your advisors. This video is going to be available on YouTube and our Facebook forever. So you can go back, watch this as many times as you need, and maybe this will help inspire you to ask a few more questions. So again, like, share, and comment your questions on these videos, and they'll be sure to get to the advising staff. And that's everything from us. Have a great week, you guys.